Get your gear ready. This is a Sherpa's Guide to Innovation. Greetings and welcome to a Sherpa's Guide to Innovation, a podcast dedicated to guide you along your innovation expedition. This is Ben Tingey and Jay Gerhardt, and we'll be discussing our insights and learning from our recent attendance at the Mayo Clinic Transform conference, which was September 27th to 29th in Rochester, Minnesota. There will be videos of the conference that will be posted online at the conference website, but we wanted to get together to share our ideas with each other and also with our team and with the rest of you. So before we get into it, Jay, what were your first impressions of Rochester?
It was funny. I got quite an impression about the first hour I got there. My flight was got in around dinner time, so I just went straight to the hotel and went to a restaurant, kind of sat down at the bar to get food and was just kind of digesting everything. I just started kind of casually eavesdropping over conversations around me, and it really hit me what Mayo Clinic in Rochester are all about. Huh. And so pretty nearby, there was a gentleman next to me talking to a couple at the other end of the bar, and I just kind of got snippets of information, and I kind of started understanding what was going on when the lady and the couples used the words recurring brain tumor. So wow. You knew that's why they were there, and it clicked to me. When you're in Rochester, generally, you're either a caregiver, a physician, someone working for the Mayo Clinic, or you're there to get care for something really serious. And they were speaking to the gentleman next to me, and I couldn't tell exactly, was he a physician? Was he a patient? I thought I heard the words heart-lung in there somewhere. So, I tried to not completely overhear the entire...
I heard you were enjoying your cornbread quite a bit.
Yes,
so,
the food was fantastic. But after the couple left, I got to talking to the gentleman there a little bit and learned that he was indeed a doctor, heart-lung transplant specialist, and he actually commutes there every week for 4 days or so a week from Tucson, Arizona. And I'm like, wow, that is something else. I kind of wanted to ask, why do you do that? But he kept talking, and then I got why. And this was a guy who was really young, fit, completely healthy seeming, impressive guy. And, he started telling me about a few years ago having some heart issues. He was telling me, his blood pressure was all over the place. At one point, it was like 160 over 40, which is almost like a nonsensical level of blood pressure to have. And he came to the Mayo Clinic. I don't know everything about the treatment. I didn't, get into it too deep, but they kind of rebooted his heart, essentially, some EP type of procedure probably, and took care of it. I'm like, wow, and kept going on. Well, soon after that, he gets diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. Again, this is not a guy you would expect that to be going on with. So he goes to Mayo, gets his treatment. Assume he's doing okay because he's doing great work. So he was there, as a patient and a physician. Now I know why he is commuting. This is a lot more than a job to him because he's doing something that's probably hard for his family. But, he was telling me, I tell people, I'm going to take care of you because I don't want to see you again. Once we take care of you, I want you to be able to go back and be taken care of. So that was like the first 2 hours in Rochester.
Wow.
And, we're working on world-class clinical services and destination care, and it just tells you what the Mayo Clinic was all about. So that was an awesome connect to purpose the first night.
Oh, what an incredible story. And to meet people like that on your first night is, maybe we're saying it's not so coincidental. Those are the people that are in Rochester. It's this smaller city There are lots of sky rises and things like that, but I don't think the population's very large. And really, it's an economy almost entirely dependent on the Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, they've had IBM in the past, and they still have some IBM facilities. So I was looking up, Mayo Clinic there has 32,000 people. It's a metro area of just over 200. So the city of Rochester is the Mayo Clinic. Yeah. They've got covered walkways that you and I toured through that take you everywhere. It is oriented towards destination care. Yeah. So it was an experience getting to see it.
Absolutely. It was really special. Well, so a little bit more about this conference. It was hosted by the Mayo Clinic Center for Innovation, and it was a 3-day event, and I believe it was their 10th year putting on this conference. That's what they said at the beginning. There were attendees from all over the country, as well as some international attendees that we got to meet, and they were actually some of our favorite presenters.
Exactly.
And so a really great collection of people who have a lot of passion about changing healthcare for the better, and people doing really creative things. And we met a lot of people that work at the Mayo Clinic and got to talk with them and hear their perspective about working for the Center of Innovation or in other areas of the system. And it is a wonderful institution, and they also said that it faces a lot of the same struggles that large institutions do struggle with, and that shouldn't come as a surprise. Yep. But that they find ways to put the patient first and sustain the excellence that they've had for such a long time.
Yeah, I think Transform is an apt name for the conference because it's really, there's a lot about transformation at the policy level, but also a lot about innovating, back at the community. And it was, a great collection of people who were very down to earth and open. I thought that was really cool for a conference like this.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the people that attended. And what we're going to do is we'll take a few minutes to talk about the 3 days, because there were maybe some themes that we can tease out that were discussed each day. So the first day, there was some meet and greet. We learned a little bit about the Center for Innovation as well as Mayo generally and its history and how it came to be. Started meeting some people in some of the pop-up spots that they had and then over lunch and things like that. And then the first session was, I thought, they had some pretty powerful speakers to kick off the first session.
Got out of the blocks
they did that
pretty well.
They sure did. It was awesome. And so Jay, why don't you tell us who were some of those people that were in that first session, and what stood out to you? What were some of the interesting things that you learned?
Yeah, I think the opening session was called Mind the Gap, and it really got into policy level type of thing. And what really they were all good, but Andy Slavitt, I was not really familiar with before. Really oversaw Obamacare and CMS and had a large role there, and obviously he's not in that capacity now. But I'd never heard him speak, and he really laid out such a logical, fairly bipartisan approach, although I'm sure he's fairly partisan, and you could see that a little bit, but it was really down the middle. And, one of the things I wrote down, he said, we can't afford to have health care shift from election cycle to election cycle. We can't recreate this every 4 years. And I'm like, absolutely right. But that feels like where we are. But that stuck out to me, and he had 4 building blocks. You probably took these down too,
yep,
so
I wrote
you might want to start on that.
Sure. So, and the first one I think was related to his comment about we can't keep going back and forth, switching between election cycles. As he said, what will make healthcare stick, making a fix really happen, is if we can get Americans to understand the trade-offs and create a system that 60 to 70% of America can agree with.
Yeah.
So this is something where it's not just one party making the legislative changes, but it's something that there's consensus from both aisles, and the vast majority of the country is accepting of it. And then that's that's really the system we have to get to. That was his first point.
He made it sound so simple, but we probably know it's not. But that was a good starting point. And the second thing he talked about was the need to test policies at a state level. And he mentioned, Romney Care in Massachusetts. There was a lab, and there are other states doing things. So, and that's the innovation mindset. And I think that's great to apply to this, because when you try to change 50 states at once, that's a big battleship to turn. So let's try some different things in states, try smaller experiments and see what works. And maybe we don't think about the government for experiments, but we've got to do something to get some traction on change. I thought that was great advice.
Yeah, and to his credit, from someone having spent so much time at the federal level, it was great to hear that they're encouraging innovation and experimentation at the state level.
Yeah.
The third was, as a healthcare system, we spend a lot of time worrying about quality and sustaining innovations and the types of things, but really, in order for the system to transform, we have to focus so much more on costs.
Yeah.
That is so key, that we have to deliver great care, as great and even better than what we're doing right now, but we've got to figure out the cost problem.
Yeah, and he made the point. I think there were a lot of people in that room who could probably sign on to single payer, but he made he might too, but he made the point that we're not even ready. If we signed on single payer now, how do we control the cost? I mean, that would be a serious burning platform, but could really create some turmoil, because we're not there yet as an industry.
Yeah. And then the last one that I have written down is shifting our mindset about innovation and its potential, to thinking about it in a different way and directing it toward different areas. So right now we're trying to fix a lot of things about the healthcare system, and he said we need to see more innovation around the social determinants of health. We need to see more innovation around caring for vulnerable populations and housing scarcity and housing, what's the word?
The social determinants.
Yeah, adverse childhood events and
it's well like beyond what healthcare can do on its own. But even within healthcare, I thought that really teed up what we heard on day 3 really well with some of the folks like Halima Khan, Catherine Pereira, bringing more of the social innovation. That hit me. There's so much that can be done that doesn't involve big buildings and re-engineer entire systems, and it takes the community. So I thought that really set the tone for later in the conference.
Yeah, and there was a neat speaker that same session, Dr. Rita Redberg. She writes this journal series called Less is More. And a lot of the topics that she talked about, I think, had a low-end disruption feel to it, where some of it was trying to reduce unnecessary utilization and stuff like that, but other things were there is a good enough solution in healthcare that we need to be providing a lot more of, that from a value perspective is much better than some of the costly prescription drugs and procedures that we're currently doing. Yeah. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. I'm interested to see what some of her articles
and again, it set the stage, because when Clay wrapped things up, that low-end disruption, it really opened my eyes on that. Another speaker, definitely a passionate speaker that I'd never seen before, is Robert Pearl, who was a former CEO of the Permanente Group, and I think he has a fairly recent book out called Mistreated that might be worth a read. But it was really interesting to hear from him leading a system who's been pretty out front in terms of capitation, and he beat that drum real hard. He basically very strongly believes that until we are really operating in a capitated environment, there's really no way we can transform the system. So it would probably be a good book to check out. A quote he had that it really stuck with me is he talked about context shifts and changes. It's context context shifts and changes behavior and perception. I might not have that quite right, but it really gets into shifting behaviors and perception before you really instill change.
Yeah. He teaches occasionally at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and I think he spent some time learning about it and teaching about disruptive innovation. He seemed to touch on that a little bit, or at least he used the word disruption if he's using exactly Clay Christensen's specific definition. But one thing that I thought could be an interesting topic for a future podcast, he said that he thinks medical tourism is going to be a major disruption to the healthcare industry.
That's right. And I wonder about that.
Yeah, I was trying to...
I don't want to undersell the idea, but he talked about the 2,000-bed hospital going in the Grand Cayman Islands. It's going to be a lot cheaper, but it's just off the coast of Florida. That could be disruptive to some segments. I question the scale, but it's certainly something to think and talk about.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. Well, that, I think, is day one. There are a few other speakers. Do you have anything else for day one,
Yeah,
Jay?
I think just a couple of other things about day one is being introduced to the Mayo Clinical Innovation team, which we were looking forward to, and we got to talk to several of those folks. They've got a 60-person team. Now, they're covering Arizona, Florida, and Mayo and Rochester. You kind of forget they have some satellites as well. And very impressive what they're doing. I mean, I think they take some very similar design approaches to what we do in the innovation engine. But I really like the example. They had I don't know if she was a breast surgeon or a medical oncologist, but they had a clinician there talking about really using design thinking on the care model for breast care. And I thought that was a really great example of that. And I'd like to see us and others doing more in that arena. So it was good learning, be good to connect with those folks later and see more about what they do.
Yeah, and we learned a little bit about their team composition. And I'll just take a minute to share what I learned. So they have designers that do service design or other, types of design elements, and then they have a role called innovation coordinator, and there are a few people in that role, and those are longtime Mayo employees who really understand the system and have lots of connections across the system, and they act almost as a conduit between the design team and the operational stakeholders, helping to make sure that the work is translated and communicated and really managing that relationship. And then they have project managers who are more responsible for the operationalizing of whatever the new design process is. And so they're there to work very closely with their operational leaders to make sure that the new processes are implemented and it's sustainable and that it's over years that they continue that process. They also had an embedded IT group, which
they had I think 3, 4, or 5 folks that work closely with them.
Awesome for rapid prototyping and things like that. Yeah. So pretty cool setup.
Good group. I think they've been in place for about 10 years. So we in innovation, I think, are in our 5th year. So we could aspire to that as a 5-year goal.
Trajectory. Yeah.
But they've got, I think they've got a good cadre of, design trained folks, whether it's Rhode Island or wherever. And they've got people, trained in industrial design in some cases, but are really doing service design now. So some really well-trained people.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other day one thoughts?
No.
All right, day two. Some of the sessions, we started out with a session called Overcoming Inertia.
Yep.
And I have a few notes on this one. Maybe you want to kick it off, Jay?
Yeah, what struck me when Doug Wood, who's over the Mayo Center for Innovation, he came out and kind of set the tone for the day and wrote a couple of things down. We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard for care. And it was interesting. I'd never heard of something called Cologuard, but it's an alternative treatment to colonoscopy. I'm like, wow, that, I'm almost 50. I need to check this thing out. So that's something to learn about. But he also said the best definition of health he's heard in talking to patients is I can do everything I need to do so that people who depend on me know that I'm okay. And I think you and I looked at each other, and he didn't use the word job to be done, but he basically expressed an exact job to be done, which was really pretty cool.
There was one thing that I really liked. It was a quote, and I'm trying to remember who said it, and it ties into some comments that another Mayo leader made, I think later that day. And I think I actually tweeted this, but it said, emphasize the importance to build partnerships before you need them. And to me, I think in innovation, that's such a critical thing to do, is to be building those partnerships and relationships with people across the system so that in the change management that comes with innovation, you already have people that trust and respect you and can help move things along and have a how can we attitude in moving forward to transform the system.
I mean, there was a lot about relationships in communities. I think day 2 was when we heard Halima Khan from an organization called Nesta. And, we got to meet both Halima and Catherine Pereira, and they worked with different organizations. But you think about England, and over here it's a socialized government-run medicine, and people here aren't going to think innovation. Well, they have more, given what they spend on healthcare, they have far more constrained resources, so they have a definite need for innovation. So it was really cool to meet those two ladies who are doing really great things in social innovation, working with communities. Halima had a quote from one of my favorite movies, Howard's End. Might not be an exciting movie to all of our listeners, but my wife and I like it. But it's only connect, or the two words she focused on, and connect the prose and the passion. And she was drawing the tie to kind of an analogy of technology to the prose, but then the passion, which is the caring, the empathy, and the human spirit in healthcare. So that was a takeaway from me. They kind of have a concept they call people-powered health, and they're really focusing on wellness and prevention with what they're doing in the UK.
Yeah. There were a few others that were familiar to us, Dr. Elizabeth Teisberg and Scott Wallace. They have been instrumental in setting up the Dell Medical School, which is a new program out in Austin. And they talked a lot about that experience, the different profile of doctors that they are searching for to begin the medical school there, and some of the work that they're doing in those communities to identify value as defined by the patients. Mm-hmm. And so we've had them here at CHS, and I'm sure many have read a lot of the stuff that they have produced when they were back at Harvard. And
talking really about team-based care. Something I wrote down is a standing team will drive change rather than a pickup game. And I think it was another speaker that also made the sports analogy is we need to move from a basketball sport to a soccer sport, because basketball can be, it's a team sport, but it can be influenced very heavily by a star player like LeBron James, whereas soccer, it's got to be a real team working together. Yeah, the connection points from the goalie to the defense to midfield to the forwards. I think that was Dr. Sanghavi from Optum, who used to run, I think, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation. Pretty sure that was his previous role, and now he's at Optum. I think day 2 was when we heard from Bon Ku, I believe, from the ER doc. From Jefferson Health, and that was really inspiring to me. I'd heard the CEO of Jefferson speak earlier this year and about how he wanted to train our future medical leaders differently. how to practice with empathy and that sort of thing. So they basically train physicians there now in design thinking. They have them prototyping, they have them practicing empathy and that sort of thing. So I thought that was really cool and exciting and be interesting if we could do something like that in the Carolinas. Be a great skill set for future practicing physicians and healthcare leaders.
And Dr. Koo said that one of the many reasons that they did it is that it has appeared to be a pretty powerful antidote to physician burnout.
Yeah.
That getting involved in design thinking has really revolutionized, at least for him. He talked about his personal journey of feeling very burnout and feeling like he was just a cog in a system, but that design thinking helped him feel more empowered to go out into the community. And he talked about some neat stories of patients that he and his team had worked with very directly. And another theme of the conference that Dr. Koo talked about and others was the really sad fact that in America, your healthcare is more strongly correlated with your zip code than almost anything else.
It's social determinants.
So he talked about some things that they were doing in certain zip codes in Philadelphia, and one of the social movements that came out of the workshop that Halima Khan and Catherine Pereira and their teams led was this idea of zip codes, and so at the very last session there was a mini social movement put on by people in one of the workshops about the zip code, and they had this chant and this hashtag unzipped and trying to create some awareness out on a national level of zip code being such a factor in people's healthcare, and can we create some more equity? Yeah,
there's some little mini activism at the conference because they were asking the question, where's the patient voice? And it made me think about Amazon, who we talk a lot about. In every Amazon leadership meeting, I understand there's an empty chair, and that empty chair is for the customer. And on the stage when we came out originally, where the seats are for the panelists, they had put patient gowns and kind of asked the question, where's the patient voice? So I think as the conversations went on, there were some pretty good examples of that we'll get to. But I think it was day 2. Catherine Pereira from National Health Service Horizons Innovation Group asked the question, who comes into healthcare just to do their job? There's not that many. She was a really powerful speaker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, day 2 was a long day, but it was jam-packed.
And the debate. It ended with the debate in day 2.
That's right. So there was a neat debate hosted by Intelligence Squared, and I did a little bit of research on them. They do debates of lots of different topics. One that they're doing soon is whether younger generations are beginning to reject the ideas of democracy and wanting more socialistic types of government. Another one I think was on whether we should be paying college athletes, and lots of different topics. Yeah. But this one was about whether the U.S. healthcare system is terminally broken. And so there were 2 sides to the debate. One was the for position was Dr. Robert Pearl from Permanente Group, or formerly of Permanente Group, and then Dr. Brownlee, I think was her name.
Yeah, she was a researcher, bioethicist, maybe, if I have that correct. He was paired with her. The other side was Zeke Emanuel from, was it
Pennsylvania?
Yes, he was by far the most animated and entertaining. So I need to find some YouTubes of him. He was incredibly passionate. And then he was paired up with the current CEO, with Geisinger. So
Dr. Feinberg.
Those were heavy hitters. I think pretty much everyone on the stage had a book of some
that they had
sort.
written on their own. Yeah,
but it was a well done debate. It was streamed live, and I think a lot of it I found myself tough to vote because it kind of depends on how you interpret the question. What is a terminal patient? And I think some were interpreting it that means that there's no hope for health care. I think the way Robert Pearl and his partner were looking at it is it's fixable, but we can't stay on the current trajectory. We've got to do
such a radical transformation that it will look so different than what it looks like today.
Yeah.
And I think Dr. Manuel and Dr. Feinberg were saying that we're making a ton of progress. If we keep going in this direction, it will get better with maybe more incremental types of changes.
I think they were saying if we could keep with experiments and things that are going on, and longtime players like Geisinger and Kaiser and folks like that who are doing Intermountain, doing a lot in population health. If we stay on that trajectory, he thinks by 2030 we could really get it right. The other side, I think, was really looking at, and you look at the graphs and the numbers that you see, 17.5% of GDP in healthcare, and no one's even close. I think that's kind of what the other side was looking at, is the gap is so wide. But no, it was a really thought-provoking debate. Got to give you credit for stepping up with the awesome question on social determinants, and if we need to focus on that, is our social infrastructure equipped for that? So yes, we thought he wasn't going to let your question in, but once he heard it, he realized it was a good question. He let it in.
Well, the person right before me had asked a similar
that was a great
question.
End of the day.
Yeah, that was a fun day. It was a long day, and then we went to an event afterwards with some startup companies and got to see a co-working space, which was enjoyable. But day 3 was Clay Christensen.
That's right.
Right. Where do you want to start with Clay?
Yeah, and we could start there. I think I just realized some of what we talked about before might have been in day 3, so if you actually attended the conference, my apologies. But, Dr. Christensen, who obviously we talk a lot about on this podcast, came and really he started with some personal reflections, because he's obviously had, if you know his history with health, with heart, cancer, stroke, teaching himself how to speak again. He's even on stage, he can't feel his feet, so he has to use a walker, and he struggles for the words sometimes. And he's such a humble guy, just says, I'm going to struggle with some words. If you think of what they are, go ahead and shout them out for me. But he really went through the theory of disruption, the basics of it, brought it into healthcare. And I think what really hit me is, thinking about low-end disruption. And he made the statement that we're not really going to dramatically shift the cost curve without low-end disruption, that sustaining innovations won't get us there. And I think taking in the whole few days, all of the work in social innovation, what we need to do with prevention and wellness. He kind of went through, the places, you go from getting care at hospitals to physician practices to virtual clinics to the home. And then who's giving you the care? It's taking you from the doctors to the nurse practitioner to the pharmacist to the family. And it's the ultimate disruptor is people actually taking care of themselves in the home. Yeah. What's lower end than that? But that's often not good enough in some terms. So.
Yeah. He said you have to create new institutions, not change the old. And then he had some criticism for healthcare systems who are trying to build a whole lot of new buildings. What did he say about that, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, when they ask about hospital systems putting up a lot of new businesses, I think, what did he say? We should pray for them, because I think he feels like if we do what we need to do with population health, we won't need all of that. And that's something that can certainly be debated. I'm sure there's a lot of different views on that. But I think, the takeaway was we've got to be able to. We do have a capital intensive business, and we've got to invest in that and keep it up. But we've got to channel more investments to different things, in population health and more social innovation type of work.
There are a couple things that he mentioned about jobs to be done that I loved. He got to the point that health is not a job to be done. The job is I want more life. It's not that I want more health. And that when healthcare systems are so focused on just fixing the problem, that often misses the mark of truly helping patients get to the job that they need done to make the progress they want in their life.
And I know we've been beating the drum on that ever since we did the work with Bob Mesta and Rewired. And when you ask people to explain health, they can't, and it's not ultimately what they're seeking. And it's very hard as a business to be told people aren't actually seeking what you want to give them, but they're seeking the progress you can help them get. So it was great for me to be able to hear Clay kind of send that message to a whole room of healthcare leaders, and I think that bodes well for the future.
Yeah, and he encouraged talking to patients and getting their perspective. He cautioned. He said your view of the market can be skewed if you aren't talking to patients who have fired you. Yeah. So he said that with some of the sustaining innovations that healthcare systems have done, there are some people that have just stopped getting care or stopped accessing the healthcare system for whatever reason, and there are lots of reasons. And we typically are talking with the patients who are accessing the healthcare system, and very frequently, and they have very loud voices and have the means or the resources to make their voice heard. But there are others who either have chosen not to make their voice heard, but they still have impressions that are important for us to understand.
And they're not consuming services.
They're not consuming. They
fired us for some reason. They may not be able to
get
to the services.
Yeah.
Maybe you can't even hire.
And so if you're only taking into account the perspectives of those who are hiring you, then you're missing a huge segment of the market of people that have fired you that would give you a whole ton of insight, particularly around, I think, how to create better low-end disruptions, because that's likely the stuff that they would begin to access if it was available. And
you learn whatever workarounds non-consumers are using, and you can really learn from that. No, that was a great takeaway. In one of our earlier podcasts, we talked about Iora Health, and he actually cited them, the health coach model, and we were encouraged by that. And when we met him afterwards, we were able to talk to him a little bit about what we're doing in proactive health, which, very similar health coach model. And he seemed excited about that and wanted to hear about that. So
it was music to our ears when he said that we aren't doing enough in healthcare to understand how to change business models. And so it was really validating because that's when he started talking about Iora and these other models of changing the traditional focus on a physician, and creating more of a low end type of solution with coaches and other pharmacists and others that could provide a lot of the same things that physicians are currently doing.
Yep.
It was just a ton of fun. And oh boy, what else? Any other thoughts about I think one thing he said something about EHRs, because Elizabeth Rosenthal, who was the moderator for most of the day, she, I believe, is the editor at Kaiser Health News, or leadership there. She asked him about EHRs, and he said that he felt those were very ripe for disruption.
Yes, which is interesting with this company named Amazon that has a pretty significant web services and analytics capability. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, we shall.
Now, it was a great 3 days. Again, like I said, aptly named at Mayo Transform, and hope folks have gotten something, out of the takeaway, the summary, and we'll get information to people show notes and at work about how to access the videos. I think that'll be really helpful.
Yeah, and we can't say enough about our experience. The Mayo Clinic was a wonderful host.
Yes.
The accommodations, just everything was very classy, very well done, and really a terrific experience all the way around.
Yeah, really well organized.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Well, this is Ben Tingy and Jay Gerhardt. We appreciate you listening. If you have feedback for us, we'd love to hear it. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Google Play, and we'll be posting notes and other things for you to access more information about the Mayo Clinic Transform Conference. Thanks so much, Jay, for talking about our experiences. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.